The key for WMS selection, at least as a manufacturer, is to consider how the WMS is going to interact with your core ERP system. ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning, a piece of software that was initially designed for manufacturing, and therefore it is very much viewed as a necessity within manufacturers. You need something to help you do your raw materials management, your bill of materials, assembly, works orders. And then at the same time, you need something to handle your finished goods. So we've got works in production and we've got finished materials. Now, the options are, do you go then, looking at your ERP, is it something that you're going to be staying with for the next 5 to 10 years? Highly likely that yes, you are. And then, so it's worth looking at, right, with the ERP, what are my options? And the options are usually, do I go with the ERP's warehouse management system? And with some ERPs, this will be very much the default and possibly the only option, because if the ERP has locked down their API or they've not made it easy for partners to come in and provide a best of breed solution, then it's likely there won't be any existing warehouse management systems that are tightly integrated. And if that is the case, then really the challenge is going to be your ERP provider, and are they moving forward with their WMS at a pace that you need them to support your business? The second point that I'm gonna make will also kind of link back into this. So the other option is, if the ERP provider does have a strong partner network, let's take NetSuite as an example. They've got their own warehouse management system. They've had a couple over their time, but now they've got this NetSuite WMS, of which they're also creating a NetSuite Advanced WMS. That's very much focused on ticking the boxes of a warehouse management system, and thinking about, if you think of warehouse systems in terms of 3 tiers, possibly ticking the boxes of a tier 3 WMS, with basic barcode scanning, but then also introducing some more advanced processes like license plating. And then again, demonstrating like the benefit of being tightly integrated. They're more likely to go into handling things like expiry date management, batch and lot control, serialization, those things that are used by manufacturing companies. And you also need tightly integrated back into your ERP if you're going to use barcode scanning or a warehouse management system. Now, with NetSuite, let's just take the manufacturing example. You've got their core WMS, which has got that basic functionality. It's going to support your works orders. It's going to support your assembly. It will do all of those things. In addition to that, then, there's also ERP add-ons that focus on serving that specific requirement. For example, there's platforms like RF Smart that provide barcode scanning extensions to NetSuite. Now, they are very popular with manufacturing companies because they provide that scanning capability. Where they can fall down, potentially, not necessarily RF Smart in particular, but is the transfer of data back into the core ERP, where they're relying on the database of the ERP to send the data back. And obviously the mobile performance is really critical when you're using a warehouse management system. So that's one thing to be mindful of. And I remember this being an issue with back in the day with Sage 50 or Sage 200, where you'd have a barcode extension to it that rides off the database. Can be very slow if you're handling very high transaction volumes. High transaction volumes might be more than 20 people in the warehouse. And then I guess the other big shift in manufacturing, which is been the shift for every type of business, is this movement towards direct to consumer. So these vertically integrated businesses where you're no longer just a manufacturer, but you're also manufacturing, you're distributing, you're marketing, you're owning that customer experience all the way through, and providing a really nice feedback loop back into your own company to hopefully enable you to build better products. And the challenge, if you're in that space, is that if you do go with, you may well be best going with the ERP add-on or the ERP's native WMS for your raw materials, works orders, all that side of things. But where you're going to fall short would be on the e-commerce direct-to-consumer fulfillment element, where the requirements from a WMS are very different. So you're likely to be handling, thousands, if not tens of thousands of sales orders per day, and seeing these very, relatively low off-peak demand, and then big peak on certain days, and then back down again, and then up for a bigger day, and then back down again. And also your growth in demand is going to be unpredictable. And what you'll hear from almost every ERP provider will be that their WMS is a good entry-level solution, and maybe it's got some more advanced functionalities for certain business types, but definitely when it comes to the e-commerce area, because it's so new and they're playing catch up in many ways, they're not going to have the functionality that you'd need out of the box to enable you to scale up and hit a very high number of sales orders, or a very high number of concurrent users on the system. And aside from that, they're not going to have the understanding of how to run an e-commerce warehouse, and they're not going to know about the best way to configure the workflows. And I think kind of the litmus test often on whether or not the ERP's WMS is going to do what you need is to go, well, look at the ERP's installed customer base, look at the installed customer base for the WMS, and where do you think that WMS is going to be targeted? Thinking from their eyes. So if you're an ERP where 3% of your customers are e-commerce, and 40% are doing raw materials manufacturing, and you've got another 10% in retail, some others in wholesale and distribution, you would guess from that kind of breakdown that it's highly unlikely they're going to go extremely deep in terms of the e-commerce warehouse management functionality. But you would bet that the raw materials, works orders, all that side of things, handling the serial numbers, lot details, all of that they're going to do, because that's going to cover a broader range of their existing clients. And ultimately, that's the aim. If you're running a multi-billion software company with a huge installed base and you're trying to build that generic product out, you need to serve many, many customer verticals, and you've got to prioritize them based on revenue. Which ones are ultimately going to sign up, and where's it going to bring us most value as a whole, rather than thinking about the individual vertical. And for most ERPs, e-commerce is still very much a very small piece of that. So what do you do then if you are in that situation? What we're seeing is companies deciding to use one set of systems for their manufacturing, for their raw materials management, the works orders. And then once it gets to finished goods, that's where they're flipping from using that the off-the-shelf ERP solution to using a dedicated warehouse management system. Obviously, our perspective of this is going to be biased by the fact that we are that e-commerce warehouse system. But if I go back 2 years ago, we didn't have any companies with ERP that used one WMS for manufacturing and a different WMS for e-commerce. We were finding that they were trying to use the same for both. And perhaps it's that ERPs are now finding their way into these companies that are doing manufacturing and are doing e-commerce, or perhaps it could just be that our exposure to it in the market has increased. Whatever. I'm guessing on that front. And then I'm going to move on to the challenge if you're in retail from a WMS perspective. And let's start with the big guys, the high street retailers who are getting pounded by rates on the high street. People aren't going to shops as much. They're being asked to innovate. How do you innovate and keep pace? And one of the things that retail have got worked out very well has been their supply chain. The back office. How do I get stuff out and onto shelves so that we've got shelves that are full of stock? Panic buying, outside of panic buying at least. And they do that exceptionally well. But what that means is if you're of that size, you've got an infrastructure and an architecture that is based around fulfilling out to retail stores. And we've seen this with one of our clients in the US, a big company on the Fortune 100. They they have an existing WMS infrastructure using actually a combination of JDA and Manhattan. Not probably not too dissimilar from some other big companies where they've ended up using a bit of both, or they've acquired two systems through an acquisition or a merger, and they're thinking, right, how are we going to support this thing of e-commerce that used to be 1% of revenue, now it's 5%, maybe now it's 10% of revenue. And I think the challenge there is that they need to move towards e-commerce, because that's the thing staring them in the face. We need to move towards e-commerce. We need to make a better experience. Not only that, we also need to be enabling things like ship from store. Well, all of these things are going to require them to ultimately, they need to rip up their infrastructure and lay down a different one logistically that can cope with all of these different scenarios. And it is driving a movement from the legacy technology into more modern setups. That company in the Fortune 100, incidentally, what we did with them was actually we went in alongside the existing WMS, and we found a way to augment it in all of the inventory within the existing warehouse systems is available for sale online. So it ticks the first box of having lots of stock available to maximize your sale opportunity. And in particular, that was a big draw for them because they were previously with a third-party logistics company where they had limited stock holding. So number one, if you want to grow online, is get lots of stock available for sale. So if you're a huge retailer, you've got loads of stock. How do you enable it? Well, you don't enable loads of stock by having e-commerce as a separate warehouse, a separate distinct thing off to the side. The way that these guys came at it was they said, right, we've got existing warehouse systems. We can pick for e-commerce like it's a store, and we can do that dynamically. Can you give us a solution so that when we do pick from store, we're able to sort those items very quickly and turn them around into e-commerce orders and ship them out the door? So that's the solution that we put in place for them. It's a good way of working with existing WMS infrastructure. I think if you're a little bit smaller than Fortune 100, and in particular, if you're a high growth retailer looking to grow your footprint of your stores, you're either going to be in a situation where you've got kind of dated technology and that you might have a retail platform that you're either happy with or not happy with, an e-commerce platform that the similar situation, and may well have an ERP, but that kind of clashes a little bit with the retail systems in my experience. So what we're thinking about here is, do we, number one, do we have a separate warehouse for all the e-commerce stock, store number 64 of 64, and do we just replan stock over from e-commerce and then we make that stock available online? So we have a separate part of the warehouse. That's option one. And if we're going to do that, wouldn't it make sense then to have a warehouse system that's dedicated to serving that part of the requirement? So yeah, we're definitely seeing that. The other situation, which is a lot more painful, but this is starting to happen, is companies are realizing that however they've hodgepodged together their e-commerce fulfillment, if it is store number 64 of 64, and they've tried to either bring in a separate system attached to the back end of the website, or if they've extended their existing retail system or WMS, as you start to scale up, you start to get some real diseconomies of scale. And a trigger point like putting in an ERP to fix your core problems or changing your e-commerce platform, they're the real trigger points where companies need to go, hang on a minute, is now the time to switch out and change to a new WMS. And we are seeing projects now where people are taking out AS400 systems, existing retail systems, custom e-commerce platforms, two WMSs running in the same warehouse with stock split between the different warehouses. We're seeing projects where that is all being ripped out and it's being replaced with a modern e-commerce platform like Shopify, for example. If they're less than kind of 30 retail stores, they may even be using the Shopify POS, connecting that all into a modern ERP like NetSuite or Business Central, and then connecting that in itself onwards to a warehouse system that's capable of handling the retail and e-commerce requirements that they've got. So that in itself, though, is a big investment. I'd say that the challenge there, from a WMS perspective, if you're the director of operations, is making sure that the business recognizes that the ROI of a WMS, thinking back 10 years when you were mostly retail stores, compared to an ROI of a WMS now, when it's the front line to your customers in the fastest growing part of your business, is very different, and it needs to be treated as such. I've been in retailers doing 10, 15, 50 million, where the ROI of the WMS is very well understood, and so well understood to the point that it's actually going to deliver the ROI that could pay for the rest of the project. It can pay for the ERP, can pay for the POS, all of the upheaval and pain that comes because they're so inefficient in the warehouse operating the way that they are. We're talking about reducing the cost per order by 50%, just on things like travel time alone. So there's major gain to be had there. That's my summary of the key WMS challenges for manufacturers, and number 2, the key challenges for retailers. Hope that helps. I'm Oliver, Sales Director at Peoplevox, company of the Descartes Systems Group. Thanks. See you later. Bye.